Okay, let's go. Number 1. Unit 731 Complex. The year is 1942. You're a Chinese civilian who has been brought to a compound south of Harbin, in a part of Manchuria where the January temperature drops to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit before dawn. The compound covers 2.3 square miles and contains 150 buildings enclosed by a wall with guard towers at each corner. There is a sign at the outer gate. It says something about public health. The full name of the installation is the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. The men who run this facility call you a maruta, the Japanese word for a log. Logs do not have rights. Logs are not counted. Logs are used and then disposed of. Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii has been running this operation since 1937 with 3,000 staff and a research mandate distributed to no one outside the imperial military. His program is biological and chemical warfare research, real research, the kind that requires something no ethical program can use. Living human subjects who cannot refuse and who can be observed at every stage of a process that ends in death. Prisoners are infected with plague, cholera, and anthrax and observed as diseases progress through every stage the researchers need to document. Frostbite experiments. Limbs immersed in water and left outside overnight at sub-zero temperatures, measured as tissue dyes. Vivisection surgical dissection of living prisoners without anesthetic conducted to observe organ function in real time. Anesthetic would have corrupted the results. The estimated number of people who died inside Unit 731 between 1937 and 1945 is between 3,000 and 12,000. The range spans 9,000 human lives. The range is that wide because the records were burned. On August 9, 1945, 2 days after the Soviet declaration of war on Japan, Ishii ordered the compound demolished. Buildings were dynamited. The last prisoners were executed. All documentation was incinerated in bonfires that burned for days. When Soviet forces reached Pingfang, there was rubble and ash, and nothing that could be entered into evidence at a trial. Here's where it gets strange. General Douglas MacArthur had dispatched intelligence officers to locate Ishii and his surviving researchers. The data they possessed 8 years of results from experiments that no ethical program could ever legally replicate was of direct military value to a country that had just entered the Cold War. MacArthur's command offered Ishii and his entire staff full immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for the complete research data. The decision was classified. It remained classified until the 1980s, when historian Sheldon Harris located the relevant files in the U.S. National Archives. Not one member of Unit 731 was prosecuted. Not one. Shiro Ishii died in Tokyo in 1959. Multiple researchers returned to prominent positions in Japanese medicine and pharmaceuticals. The experimental data entered the U.S. Biological Warfare Research Program. Japan's government has never released its own records. Its official position is that the relevant records no longer exist. The question military historians cannot answer is not whether the immunity deal happened that is confirmed. The question is what the data contained that was worth the immunity. 8 years. Thousands of subjects. Every disease that kills people fastest when weaponized. What did Ishii find that the United States considered worth the silence about everyone who died to produce it? The next facility had a different purpose. It wasn't trying to understand death. It was trying to build a new spiritual civilization around it, and its architect believed he was designing the center of the world. Number 2. The Wewelsburg Castle. The year is 1937. You're an SS Obergruppenführer, a senior general summoned by Himmler to a castle in the Westphalian hills. You drive through forest, then up a ridge, and the triangular fortress above the tree line is being actively rebuilt by a workforce that includes prisoners from the camp attached to the grounds. You are shown into the North Tower. A staircase descends into the earth. At the bottom is a room that has never existed in any medieval structure engineered into the rock at Himmler's personal direction, and standing in it for the first time, you understand something about what the SS actually is that no organizational document has ever stated directly. The Valhalla crypt is circular, approximately 45 feet across, with 12 niches cut into its walls, each designed to hold a pedestal bearing the coat of arms of a dead SS Obergruppenführer. At the floor center, a drain. At the ceiling center, an aperture aligned directly above a shaft rising through the tower so that an eternal flame could vent its smoke upward. The acoustic properties were engineered specifically. Himmler wanted the resonance of a spoken word in this room to feel like something older than architecture. 12 niches, 12 pedestals. The living leaders would assemble in the hall directly above. That hall, the Obergruppenführersaal, is 145 feet in diameter, with an oak throne at each of its 12 positions arranged around a central floor mosaic. A 12-spoked wheel Himmler called the Black Sun. His desk was positioned so that when Himmler sat, he formed a vertical axis running from his body down through the Black Sun, through the floor, and into the eternal flame below. He was not building an office. He was designing the geometry of a new religion. Himmler began reconstruction in 1934 and planned for completion by 2033. His vision, documented in surviving architectural blueprints, was for Wewelsburg to serve as the spiritual capital of a post-victory SS empire. The Onennerbe, the SS institute tasked with locating the prehistoric origins of the Aryan race, operated from the castle. Expeditions went to Tibet, Scandinavia, Finland, the Middle East, and Bolivia. They reported their findings to these rooms. Here's where it gets strange. In March 1945, Himmler ordered the castle destroyed. SS guards executed the remaining 42 prisoners from the Niederhagen concentration camp 1,285 people had died in the reconstruction, and the demolition team went to work. The explosives brought down the outer structures. The North Tower did not collapse. American troops arrived in April 1945 to find the tower intact, the Valhalla crypt below it sealed, and the archive partially burned. Partially. The lower levels of the North Tower were sealed by Allied command following initial documentation. What that documentation contained has not been released. A German regional museum now operates at the site. The Obergruppenführersaal is open. The Valhalla crypt is labeled and accessible. The lower archival levels are not described in the site's public materials. What did the Onennerbe's expeditions actually find? What did the Tibet team report to this room? What is in the sealed lower archive that a modern German historical institution has decided not to describe publicly? And why is that decision still standing? The next facility combined institutional credibility with something even darker. The man who ran it didn't need mythology. He had a title that opened every door. Number 3. Natzweiler-Struthof Anatomy Laboratory. The year is November 1944. You're a French military investigator advancing into Strasbourg with the forces that have just liberated the city. Someone directs you to the University of Strasbourg's anatomy department. The building looks like what it is, a university facility in the center of a city. You go to the basement laboratory. What you find falls outside every category you have for what a university basement contains. On shelves and in preparation tanks, in various stages of dissection and chemical processing, are 86 human bodies, partially prepared, abandoned mid-process, as if the person working on them received urgent news and left without closing anything behind them. The professor who had been working on them was August Hirt, Chair of Anatomy at the Reich University of Strasbourg, SS Hauptsturmführer, and a man who in 1942 had written a letter to Heinrich Himmler that is now in the Nuremberg trial record. In it, Hirt explains with the calm vocabulary of a department head submitting a requisition that the university's scientific collection has a significant gap. Germany, he writes, has comprehensive skeletal series representing most racial types. What it lacks, what he intends to remedy, is a proper collection of Jewish skeletons. He requests that the SS deliver living prisoners for this purpose. The letter reads like a budget proposal. Himmler approved the request. 86 prisoners, 57 men, and 29 women were selected at Auschwitz, measured, photographed, and transferred to the Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp, 30 miles from Strasbourg, the only Nazi camp on French soil. In June 1943, they were gassed in the camp's chamber. Their bodies were transferred the same day to the university. The work of defleshing and skeletal preparation had been underway for more than a year when the Allied advance made it impossible to continue. Hirt ordered the remaining bodies destroyed before he fled. The order was not fully carried out. He destroyed his research notes. Every page of analysis, every theoretical framework he had been building, every conclusion he intended to derive from 86 murders processed with anatomical precision burned. He died by suicide in 1945 when capture became certain. Here's where it gets strange. The notes are gone. Not classified. Not sealed. Gone. which means that what August Hirt intended to prove what scientific argument required 86 murders and 14 months of preparation to construct is permanently and completely unknown. The crime is documented in extraordinary detail. The purpose is ash. What disturbs military historians about this case is the purposefulness. Hirt had a research program. He knew exactly what specimens he needed, had the institutional access to obtain them through SS channels, and had a methodology he believed would produce publishable results. The letter to Himmler is not the writing of a sadist. It is the writing of a scientist who decided the only obstacle between him and a completed body of work was the lack of appropriate raw material. The completed publication that would have emerged from those 86 deaths does not exist. It cannot. It was burned by the man who wrote it. What did he expect those measurements to prove? Who among his colleagues in German academic medicine knew what the collection was for? And what gap in the scientific record did he believe he was filling that required 86 murders to close? The next facility needed more material. Not 86 people, 20,000. And what those 20,000 built is still orbiting the Earth. Number 4. Middlewerk Underground Factory. The year is late 1943. You're a concentration camp prisoner on a train that stops in the Harz Mountains after 2 days of movement. You are marched toward an entrance cut into the face of the Kohnstein Mountain. Inside, 2 parallel tunnels, each 1.2 miles long, bored through solid rock, connected every 200 feet by cross passages, forming a structure like a ladder laid horizontally inside the earth. The air smells of blasting powder and ammonia. In some sections, the rock face is still being cut. The facility is not finished, and you are part of the workforce that will finish it. Men are sleeping on the bare tunnel floor because there is no other accommodation. Those men are the ones who survived the first 3 months. The middlework was built to produce the V-2 ballistic missile, the world's first operational ballistic weapon, and the V-1 flying bomb. Between late 1943 and April 1945, the facility produced approximately 6,000 V-2 rockets and 1,400 V-1 bombs. Those weapons killed an estimated 9,000 people in London and Antwerp, overwhelmingly civilians. The labor force was prisoners from the Dora concentration camp, built specifically for this facility. 20,000 prisoners died at Dora over the middlework's operational period. Some died of exhaustion and disease. Others were executed. The SS defined certain acts of deliberate sabotage, including loosening a component during assembly, as capital offenses. The hangings were conducted inside the tunnel in view of the remaining workforce and documented in German administrative records found after the war. The lead technical mind was Wernher von Braun. He visited middlework during production. He selected skilled prisoners for specialized tasks during documented visits. A French investigator at the Nuremberg trials submitted evidence of this. Von Braun was not prosecuted. His stated position that he was a scientist focused on engineering, not labor conditions, was accepted by American authorities. Here's where it gets strange. In April 1945, von Braun loaded 14 tons of V-2 technical documentation into crates, buried them in an abandoned mine shaft in the Harz Mountains positioned in territory projected to fall under American control, then after surrendering to U.S. troops, told them exactly where to find the cache. American intelligence recovered it in May 1945. Von Braun and 118 colleagues were transferred to the United States under Operation Paperclip. The documents went with them. Wernher von Braun became director of NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. He designed the Saturn V rocket that put Neil Armstrong on the moon in July 1969. He received the National Medal of Science from President Kennedy. He died in 1977 as a celebrated American hero. The Saturn V was designed by the man who ran the factory where 20,000 prisoners died. That is not an accusation. It is documented fact. It was not discussed during the Apollo program and is not discussed when the Apollo program is commemorated. The Operation Paperclip files documenting what the transferred scientists knew about conditions at Dora and middlework were partially released in 1999. Some remain under national security review. What was in the 14 tons von Braun chose to hide specifically from Soviet hands? What did the American program absorb from those documents that has never been separately accounted for? And why are some of those files still classified 80 years after they were buried in a mountain? Number 5. Auschwitz concentration camp. The year is summer 1944. You're a prisoner arriving on the selection ramp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The SS physician at the rail is moving down the column, making a hand gesture left or right, at a speed that suggests he has done this enough times that the gesture has become reflexive. The physician is Dr. Joseph Mengele, 33 years old, white gloves, and he is not looking at people the way the other officers are. He is looking for something specific: twins, people with two different colored eyes, a condition called heterochromia, dwarfs, individuals with visible hereditary characteristics. If he sees you in this way, you are separated from the column. You are taken to Block 10. Block 10 is a sealed building within the camp. Its windows have been bricked over. What happens inside is not for anyone outside to observe, and it is not for the people inside to communicate to the world. Mengele's research program at Auschwitz runs from May 1943 to January 1945. He studies an estimated 3,000 twin pairs. The experiments: infecting one twin with a pathogen while the other serves as control, then comparing the progression. Surgical procedures performed without anesthetic. Attempts to change eye color through chemical injection directly into the iris, resulting in infection, blindness, and in many documented cases death. Each procedure was recorded in meticulous handwritten research notes. Tissue samples were preserved. Eyes removed from subjects with heterochromia were individually catalogued and sent to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Genetics, and Eugenics in Berlin. A survivor named Vera Kriegel described a shelf in one of the Block 10 examination rooms. Preserved eyes in glass jars, organized by color. She said they watched her from the shelf during her examinations. Here's where it gets strange. On January 17, 1945, 4 days before Soviet forces reached Auschwitz, Mengele left the camp. He took his research files with him. Every page of experimental data, every methodological note, the entire documentary record of what he had observed and planned to publish from 2 years of experiments on thousands of prisoners walked out the gates and was never recovered by Allied forces. Mengele lived in South America under a false name until 1979, when he drowned. In 1985, a cache of personal diaries was found in Brazil. West German authorities examined them and published partial findings. The diaries contain reflections on his theoretical framework, but not the experimental data, not the research files. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin was captured by Soviet forces in 1945. The specimen collection, which included material sent from Block 10, was inventoried by Soviet authorities. Those inventory records are in Russian military archives. They have not been published. Where are Mengele's research files? What data left Auschwitz in January 1945 that decades of searching by every major Allied government has never produced? What is in the Soviet inventory of the Kaiser Wilhelm specimens that has been held in a Russian archive since 1945 without being released, and what does that inventory contain that the published accounts of Mengele's program don't describe? The next facility was also where Soviet forces arrived first, and what they found there, alone in those rooms before anyone else came through the door, has been carefully managed ever since. Number 6. Führerbunker Complex. The year is May 2, 1945. You're a Soviet SMERSH intelligence officer, military counterintelligence, and you are among the first non-German personnel to enter the Führerbunker through the garden entrance of the ruined Reich Chancellery. Berlin stopped fighting yesterday. Below ground, you descend into 8.5 feet of reinforced concrete in every direction, 26 feet below the surface. The air is old and stale, laced with exhaust from generators running on their last fuel. The lights are on. The rooms are largely intact. Papers are on desks. Maps are pinned to the boards in the situation rooms. Personal effects are present in the residential quarters. You have the building to yourself. Western Allied forces are not here. They will not be here for days. You and your colleagues are the first outsiders in this structure, since the German command abandoned it 48 hours ago. Your orders are to document what you find. Everything you produce will be classified the moment you hand it over. The Führerbunker occupied 18 rooms across 2 levels. It was Hitler's primary command post from January 1945 until April 30th, 1945, 105 days, during which the decisions that determined the last chapter of the European war were made here. Communications equipment, situation maps, orders, correspondence, all of it was present in these rooms at some point during those months, and some of it was still in the bunker when Soviet forces arrived. They had the bunker for 72 hours. The Soviet Smersh reports on the Führerbunker's contents were classified immediately under Soviet state security procedures. After the fall of the Soviet Union, some documentation was released in the early 1990s. The complete inventory has not been published. Historians who have worked with the partial releases describe a significant gap between what surviving German staff described as present in the bunker's filing systems and what appears in the Soviet accounting. Here's where it gets strange. In 1988, the East German government demolished most of the Führerbunker structure. The stated reason preventing the site from becoming a neo-Nazi pilgrimage destination was legitimate. The demolition was conducted without comprehensive archaeological documentation of what was inside. Pre-demolition excavations produced artifacts transferred to East German state custody. No public inventory of those artifacts was published before German reunification. After reunification, the responsible authorities could not produce a complete account of what the excavation had found. The western section of the Führerbunker complex, connected to the old Reich Chancellery by a passage, was not demolished. It is sealed below a parking garage in central Berlin. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in the mid-2000s confirmed intact substructure beneath the site. The Berlin Senate has not authorized excavation. The official position is that the site should not be made a point of historical attention. You can stand on the parking surface above the sealed western section today. A small information board is nearby. The concrete below your feet connects to structures where Hitler spent the last 105 days of his life. No one has been inside since the East German demolition crews left. What was in the Soviet inventory that was never released? What did the pre-demolition excavation find that has no public accounting? And what is in the sealed western section that a modern democratic government has decided should remain inaccessible rather than be examined? Number 7. Peenemünde Army Research Center. The year is 1943. You're a British photographic intelligence analyst at RAF Medmenham, and the aerial photographs on your light box show a Baltic coast facility that matches nothing in your reference files. Usedom Island remote, forested, accessible by a single road from the mainland, Baltic Open to the north. On the photographs, circular earthwork structures, a propellant storage installation, rail lines running to a launch area with a distinctive trajectory configuration, and buildings whose function cannot be classified by any existing category. You flag it as priority. What you are looking at is the most advanced military research facility in the world, approximately 2 years ahead of anything any Allied nation is building. Peenemünde was constructed from 1936 on the island's northern coast, chosen for its isolation and its unobstructed coastal launch range. At peak operation, 15,000 scientists, engineers, technicians, and support personnel worked there. Its primary program produced the V-2, the world's first operational ballistic missile, and the V-1 flying bomb. Between them, these weapons killed approximately 9,000 civilians in London, Antwerp, and cities across Western Europe. The slave workers who built the facility and maintained its systems came from Dora and from Middlework. The men who knew the physical layout in the most specific detail, who had drilled the bolt holes, poured the foundations, installed the cabling, were transferred back to the camps as their work was completed. The men who knew the most about the facility were the men least able to report on it. The RAF bombed Peenemünde the night of August 17, 1943, Operation Hydra. 596 bombers, 40 lost. The facility was damaged, not destroyed. The program relocated partially underground and continued. Here's where it gets strange. In April 1945, with American forces advancing from the west and Soviets from the east, Wernher von Braun organized an operation that had nothing to do with defense. He loaded 14 tons of V-2 technical documentation into crates, identified an abandoned mine shaft in the Harz Mountains, specifically in the territory projected to fall under American control, buried the cache, and after surrendering to U.S. troops, told them exactly where to find it. American intelligence recovered the documents in May 1945. Von Braun and 118 colleagues transferred to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Soviet forces captured the eastern section of Peenemünde. Soviet engineers dismantled and shipped entire installations, wind tunnels, testing equipment, hardware to the USSR. Soviet intelligence interrogated the German researchers who had not gone west. The rocket program that produced Sputnik in 1957 and the R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile was built from what Soviet forces found at Peenemünde. Two superpowers built their Cold War rocket arsenals from the same research facility. Neither published a complete accounting of what it received. What was in the 14 tons von Braun chose to hide from Soviet hands specifically. What did Soviet engineers find in the portions of the facility the American extraction didn't reach? And what does the gap between what each side claims to have recovered and what its subsequent rocket program produced say about the real contents of that Baltic island archive? The program that followed Peenemünde didn't operate in remote forests. It ran inside hospitals, under physicians' authority, and the methodology it developed was transferred directly to the death camps. Number 8. Action T4 Killing Centers. The year is 1940. You're a German psychiatric patient at a state institution in Bavaria. A nurse tells you that you're being transferred to a better facility, more modern, better equipped for your care. You are helped onto a gray bus. The windows have been painted over from the inside. There is no destination sign. The bus is operated by an organization called the Community Patients Transport Service, which has no listing in any public directory and no commercial existence outside of this specific function. Moving patients from institutions to buildings whose purpose is not described anywhere in the public record. The destination is one of 6 purpose-built facilities at Greifneck, Brandenburg and Der Havel, Bernburg, Hartheim, Sonnenstein, or Hadamar, each equipped with a room designed to look like a shower. The administrative headquarters for all 6 operations is in Berlin at Tiergartenstrasse 4. This is the program's internal name, Action T4. T4 was authorized by a personal letter from Hitler signed in October 1939, deliberately backdated to September 1st, the first day of the war, to give the killing the cover of wartime emergency decree. Its mandate, the systematic elimination of what Nazi medical ideology called life unworthy of life, people with schizophrenia, hereditary epilepsy, physical disabilities, and conditions categorized as genetic threats to the national body. The method, deceptive transport, sealed room, carbon monoxide gas, incineration. That protocol fake shower room, CO gas, cremation was developed at the T4 facilities, refined there, evaluated by physicians at each step, then transferred. The doctors who designed and tested the gas chamber methodology were directly consulted when the program scaled to the death camps in the East. This chain of technical transfer is documented in the Nuremberg medical trial records. The mass murder method that killed 6 million people was first developed, tested, and peer-reviewed in German psychiatric hospitals on German civilians. Between 1939 and 1941, when Bishop Clemens August von Galen's public sermons forced the program's official suspension, 70,273 people were killed. The program did not stop. It continued covertly under individual physician authorization until 1945. The total, including the covert continuation, is estimated between 200,000 and 275,000 people. Here's where it gets strange. West German prosecutors investigating T4 in the 1960s found that physicians who had personally certified patients for death and in some documented cases administered lethal injections were practicing medicine in West Germany. Some held senior positions in public hospitals. The prosecutorial findings were not fully published. The patient case files documenting which physician certified which patient on which stated medical basis were partially burned in 1945 and partially held in the German Federal Archives under restricted access until the late 1990s. Some portions are still not publicly available. The complete operational records of the Brandenburg facility, the first large-scale CO gassing operation, the proof of concept for a method that went on to kill millions, have not been found in any archive. What did the West German prosecution find that it chose not to publish? What is in the Federal Archive T4 files that remained restricted for 50 years? And where are the records of the facility that tested the killing method on German patients before transferring it to Auschwitz? The system that designed T4 also built tunnels. 17,000 prisoners, a sealed valley, and a project designation that has never been officially explained. Number 9. Jonastel S3 Underground Complex. The year is April 4th, 1945. You're a soldier with the 89th Infantry Division of Patton's Third Army, and your unit has just reached the Arnstadt area in central Thuringia. In 2 days, 50 miles to the north, General Eisenhower will personally walk through the liberated camp at Ohrdruf and send photographs to Washington with the instruction that the American public needs to see what its soldiers are seeing. This morning, your unit has found something else. In the hills along the Jonastel Valley, Cut into the landscape in a way that takes a moment to process is the entrance system of a major underground complex. The concrete is recent post-war quality reinforced, not wartime improvisation. Smoke rises from collapsed sections. Someone tried to seal the interior before leaving. They were not entirely successful. The project carries the internal SS designation STHREE. Initiated in the summer of 1944 under direct SS administration, it drew more than 17,000 concentration camp prisoners from Buchenwald and Dora as the labor force. Construction records classify the facility's purpose as the alternate command headquarters for the BOD, German High Command, and underground installation capable of directing the war if Berlin became inoperable. A parallel thread in German military documentation, fragmentary, references the site in connection with dispersal of experimental weapons research as Allied bombing intensified at primary facilities. The construction death toll: several thousand people. The exact number is not established because the SS burned the prisoner workforce records before the American advance arrived. The estimate comes from survivor testimony and comparison with documented death rates at comparable projects. American troops photographed portions of the exterior. The 89th Division's documentation covers the complex's existence and general dimensions. It does not document the interior. Under the Potsdam Agreements, Central Thuringia fell within the Soviet zone. U.S. forces withdrew. Soviet military engineers arrived at S3 in the summer of 1945, and the region was sealed under East German state security for the remainder of the Cold War. Here's where it gets strange. In the 1970s, a Soviet-directed removal operation took place inside the S3 complex. East German administrative records classify it as a technical survey. What was removed and where it was taken does not appear in any document available in the reunited German Federal Archive or in post-Soviet military records released after 1991. A technical survey that required physically removing unspecified material from a sealed World War II tunnel complex in the 1970s has no publicly available explanation. Post-reunification German state archaeologists surveyed the Jonistal Valley in the late 1990s and early 2000s. They found Soviet-era construction materials in sections of the tunnel that should have been untouched since 1945. They also documented that multiple tunnel sections had been collapsed in a pattern inconsistent with structural deterioration. The collapses were engineered. They sealed specific sections from the rest. What was S3 actually built for? What did Soviet engineers find in the tunnels in the summer of 1945, working alone while American forces withdrew? What was removed in the 1970s from a structure that 17,000 prisoners died building? And why are the collapses engineered rather than structural? The final facility on this list was Hitler's personal wartime headquarters. When he left, some of what was inside never came out. Number 10. Wolfschanz, Wolf's Lair. The year is 1942. You're a Wehrmacht staff officer, rotating through the Führer's primary forward headquarters deep in the Masurian forest. The site has been under continuous expansion since 1947 security zones, more than 80 structures spread across several square miles of cleared forest. The outermost rings are Wehrmacht regulars. The innermost ring, Sperrkreis 1, is SS personnel who screen everyone, including officers of your rank, before each access. The walls of the heaviest bunkers are 26 feet of reinforced concrete in every direction. They are not built to survive a raid. They are built to survive a direct hit from the largest bombs any Allied aircraft currently carries. The Wolf's Lair was Hitler's primary military headquarters from June 1941 until November 1944, 3.5 years, longer than any other command facility he used during the war. On July 20, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a briefcase containing 4.5 pounds of plastic explosive under the conference table in the Lage Baraki, the above-ground briefing barracks, and walked out. The bomb killed 4 people. Hitler survived because the briefcase had been shifted behind a heavy oak table leg in the seconds before detonation. The blast-scarred conference barracks foundation is still there. In November 1944, Hitler transferred his headquarters west. He returned briefly in January 1945. On January 24th, German engineers began demolition under direct order. The facility was to be destroyed completely before Soviet forces arrived. The demolition ran until January 25th. The heaviest bunkers in Sperrkreis 1 did not collapse. The The concrete walls were too thick for the available explosive charges. Soviet forces entered the Wolf's Lair on January 27, 1945. Here's where it gets strange. The German engineers had from November 1944 until the demolition order more than 2 months to clear the facility before the Soviet advance. 2 months is sufficient time to remove documents, communications equipment, and operational materials of value. Several structures in Sperrkreis 1 were not cleared before the demolition attempt. They were sealed. There is a specific difference between a bunker closed because its evacuation was complete and a bunker whose contents were left because the removal ran out of time or because something was deliberately left inside. No inventory of what those structures contained when Soviet forces entered has ever been published. The Soviet military survey of the Wolf's Lair, conducted in late January and February 1945, was classified. It has not been released. After the war, East Prussia was reorganized as the Warmia-Masuria region of Poland. The town of Kętrzyn is 3 miles from the site, now operated as a tourist attraction. The accessible ruins, including the destroyed outer bunkers and the Lage Baraki Foundation, are open to visitors. The sealed subsections of Sperrkreis 1, where the demolition charges failed, have not been formally excavated. The Polish State Heritage Authority has not authorized a comprehensive interior survey of the structures that Soviet forces entered and then secured in January 1945. What was left in the sealed bunkers of Sperrkreis 1 when Soviet forces arrived on January 27th? What did the demolition crews not have time to remove or choose not to remove from the most restricted zone of Hitler's primary wartime headquarters? And what is in the Soviet military survey that has remained in a Russian archive for 80 years without being released? From the frozen compound at Harbin to a sealed parking garage in central Berlin, from a university basement in Strasbourg to the forest in Masuria, the facilities on this list share a single characteristic. The people who could have answered the questions they leave open consistently chose not to. The most destructive event in human history generated records that remain officially sealed, and the decisions keeping them closed are still being made today. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next list covers what those decisions may be protecting. Leave a comment with where you are watching from, because these stories travel, and it would be interesting to know how far.